Hey, it's Alicia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are making these candles out of upcycled wine bottles. This is one of my favorite crafts. I make these all the time. I think they make really nice gifts, especially if you have like a wine bottle that has some sentimental value. So we're going to go over the supplies you need and then just the step-by-step guide. Very beginner friendly. I think this is a really fun craft. I'm also working on figuring out how to do this with beer cans or soda cans. So future video coming soon once I figure that out. So for supplies, obviously first thing you need is wine bottles. I've got a few different ones here that are different shapes and sizes, just to show you a few of the things I look for. One major thing I look for is a lower label, just so you have more space to work with. You really want to cut the bottle somewhere between the label and at the top here where it starts to swoosh into the middle. So that's really kind of the space you're working with as far as cutting your wine bottle. So keep that in mind. Lower labels are a little bit easier to get started. Another thing I like to look for is a flat bottom like this bottle here. It makes it easier for the wicks to attach versus the second bottle has a much deeper bottom. So those wicks are going to be at an angle and maybe not as secure. So for cutting supplies, I just bought this wine bottle cutter on Amazon. It was about $25. This is the second kit I've got. And it comes with everything you need, including these rubber bands that you use to put tension around where you cut the bottle. This one came with an extra, which is helpful because they do break. I also recommend using gloves, safety glasses. You're also going to want to use a face mask because we're not only cutting the glass, but we're also sanding it down. You also need sandpaper, and then not shown in this video, you're going to need boiling water and ice cold water. So we're basically going to cut the glass, put those rubber bands on either side of the cut, run it under hot and cold water back and forth until it breaks, and then sand it down. So this is our bottle cutter. We're basically going to roll the bottle on these little wheels along the blade so that it creates a line all the way around. You want to adjust this base so that the bottom is secure, so that the bottle isn't wobbling around while we're making that cut. I'll show you from a different angle here. So you can see I've got this pole thing really secured. Mine came with two little things to adjust it. This guy is not going anywhere, and neither is my wine bottle. So like I said before, you basically want to rotate the bottle on these wheels so that the bottle is being cut by that blade at the front there. You want to put a little bit of pressure down. I'm just hovering right here just to show you an example, but when you actually go to cut the bottle, you want to put a bit of pressure from the top, just enough so that the blade is actually making a cut. You'll kind of hear it scratching the glass, but you don't want to put too much pressure on. You don't want to be breaking the bottle. It's just the lightest bit of pressure. This is what it should look like when you're done. So those rubber bands will go on either side of that cut when we switch to the hot and cold water. My biggest advice here is to truly only do one rotation. I have a tendency to do more than one rotation, and every time I do that, my actual cuts get a little wonky, which we'll see later in the video. Okay, it's a little hard to see here, but I put those two rubber bands on either side of the cut that we just made, and now I'm going back and forth between boiling water and ice cold water, trying to pour the water as close to the cut as possible. Obviously some of it's going to bleed over, but just keep going back and forth between the hot and cold water, and eventually you will get a break. Sometimes it takes time depending on the bottle, but this is what it looks like when it's done. It really just kind of pops off, and you take the rubber band off and repeat as many bottles as you have. You'll usually hear a light cracking sound, and all you have to do is just grab either side and pull it apart like I did just there. And now it's time to sand. Sometimes you get really clean cuts, and sometimes you get cuts like this. It doesn't really bother me. I actually kind of like the unique shape of it. But this is when we're going to start sanding it down. We want to make sure that there is not any sharp edges of glass anywhere on this top where we cut. This is going to take a while depending on how many bottles you have. I'm working with 6 bottles right now, so I'm going to be here for a while. Make sure you're doing this in a well-ventilated area. Again, this is glass shards going everywhere, so make sure you're wearing gloves, make sure you're wearing a face mask, make sure you're by a window, and buckle in for a lot of sanding. Okay, now comes the fun part, the actual candle making. So I have a fragrance oil here. We obviously have our wine bottle. I've got 2 metal containers for double boiling the wax. We've got a thermometer to monitor our temperature. I've also got wicks and these little stickies, and also some tape to show you 2 different ways to attach your wicks. And then also lastly, our candle wax. So first things first, we want to attach our wicks. So we're going to take our freshly cut and sanded wine bottle. We've got our wicks here, and then also these little sticky adhesives to stick on the bottom. For a normal size candle, I actually prefer to use 2 wicks just based on how hot and quickly my wicks burn. This will be something that you might need to test out for yourself depending on the wick that you're using, but mine tend to not burn as hot as I would like. So I typically need to add 2 wicks. So here I'm just adding one kind of off center, making sure it's not too close to the glass. The last thing you want is for your flame to lean onto the glass and have your whole candle explode. So now I'm adding the second wick, adding the little sticky to the bottom there, and then again just putting it off center inside the candle, trying to line it up with this first wick. You might need to mess with them a little bit just to make sure that they're lined up straight, but then we'll take our little popsicle with a hole in it and just kind of push the actual adhesive down just to make sure it's really secure on the bottom of the bottle. This is especially important if you've got a wine bottle that doesn't have a flat bottom like we talked about, just to make sure it's really stuck on there. And then you'll use the hole in the popsicle sticks just to line up your wicks. Again, you kind of might need to mess with them a little bit. These might move after you pour in the wax, but it'll keep them straight after you pour in your wax and it starts cooling and solidifying. So before we add the wax, this is what it should look like. We've got our wicks kind of sturdy. They're stuck there on the bottom. If you don't have these little popsicle sticks with holes in them, there's no need to go out and buy them. You can also just do this with tape. I actually kind of preferred this method better. You have a little less room of actually pouring in the wax, but I found the tape to be much more sturdy than the popsicle sticks. So there's really no need to go out and buy extra supplies if you don't need to. I actually only had 4 of these popsicles ready to go, so I ended up taking most of mine. Last thing to prep, I like to line up my fragrance oil with whatever bottle I want to use it with. I kind of try and match the smell to the wine label, which sounds silly, but I don't know, it makes sense in my brain. So we've got that all set up and now we can start boiling our wax. So you'll want to boil a big pot of water, and then I have these metal containers that I'll pour the wax into, and I just use a plastic chopstick just to stir up the wax. This was my first time using beeswax and I will never use it again. It took so long to melt. Usually I use soy wax, so if I could recommend anything for you to use soy wax, not beeswax, but you really want to melt the whole thing. We're shooting for about 155 to 165 Fahrenheit, and once you get there, you can add your fragrance oil. I go pretty heavy on the fragrance oil just because I like my candles to be pretty strong and potent. So you'll add your oil, mix it in, and then you'll head over to your vessel and start pouring in your wax. Very carefully, this is very hot wax. You can see my wax starts dripping onto the floor here. I've never had this issue with soy wax. I don't know if it's the beeswax consistency, but it was really fun to clean up later. And again, I've never had this issue with soy wax. When I actually ran out of the beeswax making this video and I switched back to soy, it wasn't dripping at all. So just keep that in mind. If you're worried about wax dripping, it is really easy to clean up if it's on a hard, flat surface. So just don't do this anywhere near carpet, blankets, any sort of textile like that. And if it does get on a hard surface, just let it solidify and take like a metal scraper or a plastic scraper and it should scrape right up. But this is what your candles should look like after you're done pouring. Some of them have obviously solidified, some of them are still liquid. They'll start to solidify after about 2 to 3 hours, but personally I would wait 24 hours before moving them at all just to make sure they're fully solidified and cured. But after that, you're good to trim your wicks and light your handmade candles made from an upcycled wine bottle. These make really nice personalized gifts. You can use wine bottles from weddings, graduations, birthday parties. They make great hostess gifts or housewarming gifts. I hope this was helpful. Leave a comment down below if you gave it a try.